Thank you, Shmulik. The discussion will start with Paul. Paul will reflect first, and then Jim will come again, and then we'll open it to a direction. A few words to introduce Paul. Good day.
Say what you want, I'll try to say something else.
Okay. So, first I commit Paul. Paul still recently was the CEO, the head of Bet Israel and Deaconess Center at Boston. This is the Harvard Academic Medical School Hospital at Boston. Personally, I owe him my daughter Yael was born in this hospital, so I have some linkage there. Paul is not a physician. He is a manager and leader. He did many very serious, comprehensive managerial job project at Massachusetts in Boston area, and managed to took 2 or 3 hospitals together, put them in one center, and via a very rigorous lean processes, still on a journey. And the last word is about Israel. Paul is very concerned about Israel. He helped us and helped the Israeli healthcare industry when he decided to initiate Ehud Kukia, the new CEO at Hadassah, to have a collaborative learning. Exactly the same idea that we have the club with Bet Israel Hospital. So to host and to coach and to support Hadassah, to follow the journey and experience and what they've been learning in the last 10 years, I think, at Bet Israel Hospital. And we have kind of collaborative learning, Hadassah and Bet Israel now, and part of this visit is that we are going to do tomorrow and the day after, is start to support Hadassah as a pilot. And we wish that the entire Israeli healthcare system will follow the route that need to be transformed itself in a better, healthier system to the Israeli society as a whole. Paul, I would like to ask you to reflect on those questions from your experience, and then Jim will add.
Lovely to be here with you. I really enjoyed this presentation too. Thank you. First of all, I have to say that Yael is an above average person. And the reason for that is because she was born in our hospital. Because Beth Israel Hospital only produces above average babies. And this is actually scientifically tested. I myself was involved in the statistical sample. I would interview grandparents. After the child was born in our hospital, I would interview grandparents and I would say, how's the new baby? Spectacular, beautiful, a genius. Never once did any grandparent say below average. So that's why I knew we could produce.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention I was born in Bet Israel too, only before your time.
Well, it doesn't matter when it occurred. It's part of the guarantee.
We learned that the secret is to skip the children and go directly to the grandchildren.
What's the expression in Yiddish, I think, is grandchildren are pure profit. This question. You cannot imagine a more siloed organization than an academic medical center. The example we learned about at Hadassah yesterday. If you walk into the ambulatory emergency department, and let's say you have a neurological problem, you're fainting or something like that. You arrive, you go through triage, the nurse sees you, the internal medicine doctor sees you and says, you need to see a neurologist. We'll call a neurologist. And then you wait. And then you wait. And then you wait. Why? Because because the neurologists are busy in their department doing what makes them happy. Now, in an academic medical center, what makes a professor happy sometimes has something to do with patients. But very often it has to do with the research he's doing in his laboratory or the student he's teaching. So yesterday, literally yesterday, as I was standing there with the nurse, the neurologist showed up. But before he did, I had a chance to look through the collection of forms that were waiting for him, representing each patient that was sitting in the hallway. And I looked at, this was at 4 p.m., and I looked at the times, 10:30, 11:30, 12. People had been waiting for 4 or 5 hours. The only reason the neurologist came down was because the chief nurse of the emergency department called and yelled at him. Now, I'm not suggesting by this that doctors are not well-intentioned people. In fact, doctors are the most well-intentioned people in the world, if you think about it. They devote their lives to alleviating human suffering caused by disease. But something happens along the way, and they have other interests and so on. And the way in which they get professional advancement in the academic medicine field is usually not based on their clinical abilities. It's based on their individual research abilities. And when I say individual, I mean individual. You do not get ahead in academia by publishing a paper in an academic journal as part of a team. You get ahead by publishing your paper. So the best doctors in the world, by the way, you know that they're the best doctors in the world because you can ask them. Who works at Hadassah Medical Center? Ask any doctor. The best doctors in the world. Why? Well, because we're here. That proves it. Because we wouldn't be here if we weren't the best in the world, because our selection process to be asked to be here, how does that happen? Well, our peers in the hospital decide who should join them. And so they recruit like-minded people. There are two aspects of physicians, in successful physicians, that they are not required to demonstrate in their professional careers. One is interpersonal skills, that is the ability to actually talk to someone, and 2, teamwork. Neither of those attributes is a requirement for success, and in fact it can get in your way. So imagine the worst. At least in your place, I bet people actually talk to one another. Sometimes. So the question of how to break that down is very interesting. As Jim suggested before, what we're trying to do here is somewhat threatening. It's more than somewhat threatening. It's incredibly threatening. If I can just continue in the analogy in the healthcare world, here's what's going on, big picture in healthcare, big picture. Customer needs. What are the customer needs right now? There are 3 demographic trends that occur in developed countries right now. Older people are living to be older. We like to joke, we keep you alive through your heart attack so that you can live long enough to get cancer. But people who used to die at age 60 or 70 are now living to 80 or 90. So we have a growing cohort, cadre of people, elderly people, and they need more and more care, and they need chronic care as well as acute care. The baby boomers are narcissists. We expect everything to work for us. In fact, if I'm playing tennis on this court out here and I twist my knee and I tear a ligament, I expect to have arthroscopic surgery, and I expect to be playing tennis again within a few months. 30 years ago, first of all, I wouldn't be playing tennis, but if I hurt my knee, I would live with a sore knee for the rest of my life. So the demand from that group of people is strong in terms of entitlement, feeling of entitlement, but also they are now at the age, 50, 60, of needing care more than they needed before. And they're also going to live to be a long time. And then the third group of people is the next group coming along, who are malnourished. And by malnourished, I mean it in two ways. One is the ones who live good suburban, urban lifestyles are overeating, and so they're getting obese. And they're suffering from the disease of obesity. And then there's a new group of people, immigrants coming in, who are poor, who are malnourished the other direction, starving and don't get enough nutrition. And they have all the diseases associated with that, plus tuberculosis and things like that. So, with everything else being equal, one would say, this is a terrific time to be in the hospital business. I have 3 cohorts of society who need my services more than ever. But there's a big constraint, which is that society cannot afford to pay for them. Even before the recent recession, the cost of healthcare has gotten out of hand. Your parliament votes on how much money they're going to allocate to the healthcare system. How do they do that? Is that based on the underlying demand? No, it's based on what they think the country can afford. So then people engage in private payment on the side. The wealthier people can do that. It actually doesn't matter which kind of healthcare system you have, from the Israeli form to the National Health Service form in England to the US form. Institutionally, it doesn't matter. The same financial constraints are in place. So the question is, how do we deliver the service that people need in organizations that are composed of silos, that have huge fixed costs, buildings, staff, the assets that Jim was talking about before, where people are hugely committed to one way of delivering care, the way they learned from the people who trained them, which is the same as the way they learned from the people who trained them for the last 50 years. It's a totally broken system. And as we're finding with Hadassah, even with all those rich Jewish donors in the US who helped build a new tower, what is it, 1 million square feet? A million square feet addition to Hadassah Medical Center, probably at precisely the wrong time. Because in an environment like this, the last thing you want to do is build fixed capacity with a huge carrying cost. So that's the scenario that's going on in healthcare. It's similar to other industries, as you can recognize, both in scope and scale and so on. But definitely has this silo problem. So I think the answer, to me the answer, and by the way, I come to Lean by having, without knowing it, lived my managerial and leadership life according to these principles. And then Womack starts teaching me this stuff, and I say, oh, I think I already do that. You have a name for that? And as you know, the principles are actually very straightforward. What's the primary thing we're talking about here? It's respecting the people in the organization. Right? Every single person has something to offer. And we need to create an organizational structure and a philosophy of organization and an understanding by the leaders and the managers that their job is to serve the people in the organization, who are very well intentioned, who truthfully want to serve the customer as well, especially in healthcare, but I think in all fields. To me, though, a lot of your questions come down to the issue of how do people learn, and what's the job of a leader or a coach in helping them learn. There was every single level, it cascades. My view is that there are leaders in organizations all the way up and down. There's the CEO, there's vice presidents, there's division directors, there's unit managers, but sometimes a leader is just someone who's running a little task force or a little improvement project or whatever. So what's the nature of learning? I think it's interesting to think about the nature of learning. I think we all know the nature of learning, but we don't think about it. So there's a professor at MIT who likes to discuss 3 phases of the learning process. First phase, interest. I want to learn something new. And think about your own life. It might be anything. It might be something in business. It might be to learn a new musical instrument, play a sport, whatever it is. Oh, I'm interested in doing that. That's the easy phase. The second phase is distress. And what's distress about? Distress is about the fact that we are creatures of habit. Human beings are creatures of habit. When we're presented with a new idea, a new approach, a new framework for whatever we're interested in, we resist it. We resist changing our framework. I had a wonderful professor once who taught calculus. I was a freshman at MIT, and he was teaching calculus to us. His name was John Carlo Rota. I don't know if you ever knew Rota. Brilliant combinatorial mathematician. At MIT, the brilliant professors actually teach the introductory courses. So he's teaching us calculus, and he's a flamboyant Italian. He's going like this all the time. By the way, do you know what they call it when an Italian has a broken arm? A speech impediment. Can't do, right? So Janko is teaching us a theorem in calculus. 500 boys and girls in an auditorium, 500 of us, and he's teaching us. He looks up and he sees we're not getting it. Blank stares. So he tries again. He comes around a different direction. He looks up and he sees we're not getting it. And now he's getting angry. So he takes his chalk and he throws it on the ground. And he says, "Look, learning is overcoming your prejudices." And we all go, "Going," like this. And we get it. He had to put a little pressure on us to help us through this distressful, resistant period. He knew that we needed to change our framework, our whole concept of what we thought mathematics was at that moment to get us. And then the third phase of learning is pleasure. So there's interest, there's distress, there's pleasure. And what's your job as leader or coach? What's your job as leader? It's to have sufficient empathy with your students, with your charges, to know where they are in the learning process. So you know whether to apply or gently release pressure or positive reinforcements or so on. So I think part of your issue here about sustainability, what keeps people engaged, is how do we balance this learning process? How do we create a little distress? How do we create the interest? How do we create the distress? How empathic are we? Now, the tricky part, I think, in an organization is you're not just teaching one person. You're teaching groups of people, and they're learning at different rates and so on. To me, that's the enjoyment of being a leader, is kind of being the orchestra director a little bit and understanding that while I'm talking to, let's say that we're all here in a meeting, I might be talking to you about a question you have. I'm watching what's going on in the rest of the place too. And I'm trying to gauge how the audience is reacting and whether my message to him is also being heard by other folks. And it's challenging and fun to do. I think you have to have a fundamental enjoyment of coaching and of teaching to do lean right. And you have to have a fundamental appreciation for everybody's value in the organization. And then I just can close, and finally you have to have a sense of what the real purpose of the place is. And I want to tell you one final story on that. So in our hospital, we were going through a lot of process improvement issues, and my board was very supportive, and they understood that one of the ideas of a lean approach was to encourage people to call out problems that they would see on the factory floor. In our case, the factory floor was wards and intensive care units, but elsewhere in the hospital too. And so they said, let's create a Caller Outer of the Month award. Caller Outer of the Month award. Not for the person who solved a problem, but for the person who mentioned a problem to his or her supervisor. And I said, that's a great idea. So the first award came, and it went to a woman named Gloria Martinez. What was Gloria's job? She was what we call a transporter in the hospital. I don't know what they call them here. Transporter is a person who pushes beds around, or who delivers specimens from a clinical department to the pathology lab to be investigated. And part of Gloria's job was to deliver specimens from the GI unit to the lab. GI specimens, those of you who've had the pleasure of a colonoscopy, know what that's about. They go in, they look around, and if they see a little polyp, they clip it off, and they send it to the laboratory to see if it's cancerous. This is actually a really important test, because you can detect colon cancer early, and if you do, it's gone. And if you wait a year or two, you can die from it, or have a lot of discomfort. Gloria, age 23, recent immigrant to the United States, Spanish speaking, English not